Good evening, everyone. My name is Conan Gallaty. I'm the chairman and CEO of the Tampa Bay Times, and on behalf of our entire Times newsroom and our Spotlight Tampa Bay team, thank you for spending this evening with us. We're glad you're here, and we're really grateful to be inside of Feeding Tampa Bay in this wonderful facility. This space really represents what our community can achieve when we come together for a common purpose. So please, let's give a round of applause to Feeding Tampa Bay. Tonight is part of our Spotlight Tampa Bay series, our community conversations at the Times. The idea behind Spotlight is very simple, but very impactful: to bring people together to discuss an important topic. Events like these take complex, important issues, sometimes confusing issues, and bring people together with experts to understand the nuance behind the headlines, so that people can ask questions and come away with a better understanding of what solutions might be. And that's especially true for tonight's topic. So I would imagine that a lot of you have been reading the news, watching TV, listening to the radio, scrolling through your feed, and seeing ads and promotions and news articles about GLP-1s, products like Ozempic and Wegovy. They have been described as breakthrough drugs, game changers, miracle medications. And at the same time, they've raised questions about safety, about impacts of long-term use, and about affordable access as they become more and more popular. But tonight isn't about hype. Tonight is about facts, context, and informed conversations. It's about how these medications work, what they do to us, who they're applicable for, who should not be taking them, and how they fit into the broader picture of weight management and overall health care right here in the Tampa Bay area. We have behind me an outstanding panel: leaders in bariatric surgery, obesity medication, clinical pharmacy, and patient advocacy. People who work with these medications and with the patients that take them every single day. This is going to be a free-flowing discussion, guided with thoughtful questions, and one of the most important parts about tonight is the Q&A, where you get to ask questions to these panel of experts and hear directly from them on this important topic. Now, we are proud to have this conversation, this Spotlight Tampa Bay, as a trusted news source in the community, but we can't do it without good partners. And we couldn't have this conversation tonight without the great support of AdventHealth. So let's take a look at this short video about what AdventHealth does in our community.
Since surgery, I am down 90 pounds. I walk now with a smile on my face. I am so much more confident. My experience with Dr. Venkat in the office has been amazing. He is one of the best doctors I've ever had. He has been understanding and so supportive during this whole process. The way my daughter feels about it, she tells me all the time how proud of me she is. I'm able to play with her and play basketball now, whereas before I was not able to.
Joining us tonight from AdventHealth is Dr. Michelle Moore, Medical Director of the AdventHealth Bariatric and Metabolic Institute. Dr. Moore is certified by the American Board of Surgery and specializes in bariatric surgery. For over 30 years, he has been dedicated to helping individuals regain their health by providing cutting-edge treatment in a caring and nurturing environment. Through comprehensive, interdisciplinary approach, Dr. Moore and his team focus on the whole health of each person and apply a customized approach for improving well-being. As a pioneer of bariatric surgery, Dr. Moore has served in leadership roles in many scientific organizations. He maintains an active role in education and research. The founder of the American Society of Metabolic and Bariatric Surgery's Florida State Chapter, Dr. Moore has been instrumental in working with the Florida legislature and encouraging insurance companies and employers to support comprehensive obesity management. He has been voted by his peers as the top bariatric surgeon in the Tampa Bay region and has lived here for the past 20 years. Please help me welcome Dr. Michelle Moore.
Well, good evening. I love this place, right? And there's nothing better than going out, giving a talk, asking a friend to read your accolades. So thank you, Conan. I feel very good about myself and all what we've done in the past. And thank you for the partnership. So we at Advent, we're focused on whole patient, whole person care, and we have a laser sharp focus on treating obesity. We understand it. We've been in the space for 30 years, and we want to be sure we share those experiences with each one of you. And we wanted to get it out to the public. So thank you again for this. When Lauren, which is she's the director of marketing at Advent, asked me to give a talk, I said, how much time do I have? Because I can talk for 3 days. And she said, you only have like this much. And for all practical purposes, she put a script in front of me. So I'm going to stick to the script. Well, let's talk about obesity tonight. But I want to start with a simple truth. Obesity is a serious disease. And it's not because of the weight that brings it on our bodies, but because of the consequences of that weight that does to our organs and our systems. It's a dire state because it brings in a lot of risk for diabetes, heart disease, sleep apnea, hypertension, elevated lipids. And people can get sick with their weight to the point that they really impacts their life and their quality of life and their longevity. But in the same time, we know that about the risk of obesity with heart disease and lung disease, but a less known fact is obesity increases the risk of 13 types of cancer, including colorectal cancer, pancreatic cancer, GYN, and endometrial cancer. So the way we're thinking about it today, it's really something that we have to address. We have to work at the root cause of all these diseases and help people get to a healthier state. Now, I said that obesity is a serious disease, but it's not a hopeless one. So for the many years I've been here with all the surgeons we hired and we built up the Bariatric Institute, we see a lot of success stories. People who come in at the end of the rope about weight and what comes with weight. And they go through a structured, multidisciplinary, whole person care and to address what we can do with them regarding their weight and get them to a better life. And many of them have switched from a sedentary, non-healthy lifestyle to a much healthier, much more better healthy eating behaviors and active lifestyle, and now they live pain-free and disease-free. One of these stories that I like to bring up all the time is about a patient who's 27 years old. She was 27 when she came to see me, and I'm gonna call her Jane. She came to see me with her police officer husband, Steve. And Jane, like a lot of us, have been struggling with weight for a long time. She tried to lose weight using diets and medications to no avail. She tried for many years. She even remembers going with her mom when she was a little kid to Weight Watchers. So this is something that she struggled with for a long time, but did not get to where she wanted with weight control. And she was kind of disappointed, discouraged, and said, I'm not getting anywhere where I need to, so why would I do any of the stuff before? But when she learned that her weight was interfering with her ability to have a family and become pregnant, this is when she started to take a serious look at what weight is doing with her. And that's when she came and saw me with her husband. So we sat down, talked about a lot of the options that are that's available for her. And we decided to go with a gastric bypass because her weight was in that range. And everything went well. So Jane, like many other people, followed a focused protocol, focused clinical pathway to get to adequate weight after surgery and get her vitamins and supplements. And she saw a rapid transformation in her body and her body function. So a couple of years after her surgery, she showed up to my office with her husband with big smiles and a little baby boy. So the reduction in weight, the weight loss and the surgery helped balance her hormones, and she was able to get pregnant and start her family and do very well. So if anybody you know or you're struggling with weight, I would say you got to take a serious look at it. Today we have an expert panel of people who know this very well. I want you to hear what they talk about. I want you to ask them very pointed questions. They're very smart, so I would like to hammer them with questions to talk about what's available for obesity. And as a call to action, at the end of the day, if you are or you know somebody who has weight and they need to address it, learn about these options, go to your doctor and talk about what possible scenarios are there and what's the best treatment that fits your plan and your lifestyle. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. This is very special and dear to me because we want to get this out to everyone. And I think, Justine, I'm going to take it away.
Sounds great. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name's Justine Griffin. I'm the economy and health editor at the Tampa Bay Times. You may have noticed in your program that I do not match the face of our moderator tonight. Unfortunately, Christopher O'Donnell, a reporter who planned to be here tonight, is under the weather, so I am pitching in last minute, but I'm really happy to be here. Before I became an editor, I covered healthcare at the Tampa Bay Times for many years, so this topic is just fascinating to me, as we've seen these drugs move from being a breakthrough, new, novel experience to something that's really become part of the mainstream health conversation that we're having in Tampa Bay and beyond. But before I introduce our panelists tonight, just a few housekeeping notes. If you registered for this event online or at the table out front, and we have your email, you will be emailed a recording of this event. We are recording it now, and it will be available to watch online at our website for the Spotlight series, which is tampabay.com/spotlight. And this is also our second event in a series with our partners, AdventHealth, in this wellness series. So we have one more event coming out later this year. And if you registered today, you will receive more information about that in your email as well. So why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm going to allow our panelists to introduce themselves. So we'll start with you, James.
Thank you very much for having me here. My name is James Zervios. I'm the Obesity Action Coalition's Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. I started the OAC with our CEO about 21 years ago next month. And the OAC is a national nonprofit organization that exists to elevate and empower individuals affected by the disease of obesity through education, advocacy, and support. So you're going to hear some amazing information tonight from these medical professionals, but we still struggle with access to care for a lot of these medications. We still struggle with weight bias, internalized weight bias, external weight bias, and so that's really what OAC looks to fight and raise awareness of.
Thank you, everybody, for having me. My name is Marco Rajo, and I'm a bariatric surgeon here with AdventHealth. I did my medical training at Tulane Medical School in New Orleans, and I stayed at LSU for my general surgery training. And I completed my bariatrics training here in Tampa Bay with AdventHealth, and I've been practicing in this community ever since. I've developed a passion for treating obesity while I was in my residency training, and I saw the deep impact that these kinds of surgeries had on our patients' lives, and that really turned a switch for me, and I realized that the impact that I could have on people's lives through these forms of treatments. And ever since coming in, committing to this field, I've seen the evolution and the rise of the new different types of medical therapies that we've had since we've started, and it really is changing the way that we practice and the way that we think about this disease today.
Hello, I am Lisa Ferreira. Thank you guys for being here tonight. I know there's traffic and it's probably difficult to get here, so I'm glad you're here, and thank you for having me. So I'm a family medicine physician, obesity medicine, and lifestyle medicine certified physician. I currently have an obesity medicine practice with AdventHealth in Wesley Chapel. I was a family medicine physician for 12 years before I decided that I needed to offer more for my patients. My patients were coming in and we were talking about their medical problems, and I was prescribing more medication, and I would say, I'll see you in 6 months, and they'd come back and their weight hadn't changed, and I just didn't understand. And finally, one of my patients said, "Can you help me with weight?" And I was baffled. I didn't learn anything about that in medical school. So in 2016, I dove in and learned that obesity medicine is actually its own specialty and became board certified. Once I started putting that into my family medicine practice, I realized that my relationship with my patients changed significantly. I was now able to offer hope and offer help and actually develop much better relationships with my patients. And patients were happy, I was happy, and I realized that obesity medicine is happy medicine, and I want to do this full time. So I joined the bariatric surgery department with AdventHealth in Tampa, where I did the non-surgical weight management there for about 3 years. And then I just moved up to Wesley Chapel, where I'm a faculty member at our family medicine residency. So now I'm training our family medicine physicians how to do what I do. So thank you so much for being here. I look forward to your questions.
And hello, everyone. I'm Chris Bizotowski. I'm a pharmacist. I do not work for AdventHealth. I'm actually from Gainesville. I work with UF Health. And up there, you may be wondering why I'm here. As a pharmacist, I'm not behind the counter at CVS, Walgreens, those type of things. I'm actually what's called an ambulatory care clinical pharmacist, so I'm in the family medicine space. I operate services at a couple clinics where I do run an obesity service line now. We started it, honestly, about 3 or 4 years ago. I used to usually mainly just do anticoagulation, diabetes, general chronic disease management, and then some providers started saying, hey, as you may know, there's a physician shortage in all of America, and we have these patients who just need chronic management for this disease, and see if you can try to help them out. And now that is, quite honestly, 60% of my services is weight management for these patients because it is just so complex, touches into everything. So as we're here tonight for the GLPs, that is a particular area of focus. I do know quite a bit about all the access issues, what's coming, what's been there, the history of everything as it relates to actually getting these medications to patients. So I'm excited to answer some questions about that.
All right. And just a reminder, we will also be taking questions from you, the audience, tonight. So if you did not pick up a card and a pen at the front desk, we'll have a few folks walking through the audience handing those out. So if you'd like one and you want to jot down a question, just raise your hand and we'll make sure that you get those materials. All right, so to kick us off, Dr. Freire, I was hoping you can just give us a basic explanation of what are GLP-1s and how do they work and how are they developed?
Sure. And fortunately, we have our clinical pharmacist here for mechanism questions. So if it goes deeper, I am deferring to you. So GLP-1 receptor agonists actually started as diabetes medications. And then I think as we used them for diabetes, we realized that there were benefits to weight as well. So how they work for diabetes is a little different than how they work for weight. And what they do is regulate appetite, number one. So obesity is complicated. As Dr. Moore said, this is a chronic disease, complicated disease. But we know that there is a hormonal basis, especially for appetite. And so our body secretes hormones that are hunger signals and fullness signals. These fullness signals are hormones. One of those is GLP-1. And one of those is GIP, those words you've heard. So how these medications work for weight is that they go to the brain, part of the action is there, and they increase your fullness. The other thing they do is that they slow down how fast your stomach empties. So not only do you get some brain fullness, but you also get some stomach fullness. So people say that it takes away the food noise, but it also decreases how much food you're actually able to eat. So working in a variety of different ways.
Dr. Raho, can you tell us how successful are these drugs with weight loss? When do they don't work? Or what, for types of people, like, are they just not a great option?
So they are great medications. And success rates, like any other form of treatment in medicine, vary, right? I think a lot of it is about managing expectations and understanding that obesity is a complex disease. And there is, like many other disease forms, there is a spectrum, right? Some people have obesity that is less severe than others. And with that in mind, you have to keep in mind that the different forms of therapy, whether it's surgical, endoscopic, or medical, they have different expectations in terms of what most patients can expect to see. If you keep it within your expectations, right, like if you understand how much weight a medication is supposed to lose, then yes, the medications work very, very well. I think oftentimes we may see some miscommunication or misinterpretation of what a patient hopes their outcome will be and what their expected outcome is on a therapy, and that disconnect often leads to frustration and deciding to stop therapy because it wasn't working for me, when in reality, maybe what they expected to see wasn't what the therapy was meant to deliver. That said, these medications work very, very well, and we find that a lot of patients have great success with them. Not everybody will do well with them because people will develop side effects. Patients may not be able to tolerate the cost of these things in perpetuity. So for people who are looking for a more longer term, or who need a more advanced form of treatment as their initial modality, that's where we have patients who transition from a plan for medication to looking for a procedural option, something like endobariatrics or surgery.
Got it. Dr. Piskatowski, I was hoping you could give us a brief description of the pathology of obesity. Why are these treatments effective, and why is obesity such a problem in this country?
That is a very detailed answer. So short answer is, we're not predisposed to healthy habits in America. I mean, on your way in here, you probably saw a bunch of different drive-through options. So to be honest, we just have a lot of access issues to healthy foods from the start, because healthy foods, one, they may be more expensive if they're qualified as organic, but two, they tend to not taste as good as those cheeseburgers can. So there is just kind of this social upbringing background, but pathophysiologically in the body, there's a lot of different reasons someone may be obese. It may just be related to their dietary habits, their medical education, and medical literacy growing up. They may have genetic predisposing factors. These are either hereditary from their family or actual conditions that do exist that can predispose one to obesity. So I don't think there's a clear-cut answer as to what the exact pathophysiology is. It's a mixture of genetics, it's a mixture of body types, of lifestyle, diet, exercise. Now, as to why these drugs are so effective as that, it's the mechanism of action. Primarily, they help you feel fuller, faster, and they mechanistically help you eat less. So a lot of weight loss, a fair percentage of it can be just achieved with calorie restriction by monitoring your caloric intake. Now, that's not a one-size-fits-all by any means, and we all have different calorie needs and how we'll respond to calorie deficits. But by and large, that's how these drugs help, is mainly decreasing the amount of calories you consume.
Is it okay if I jump in? I completely agree. That was excellent. And I want to piggyback on what you said about genetics. So we think that about 40 to 70% of someone's weight is somewhat genetically predisposed. And then you put on top of that, just like you said, lifestyle and our stress and our sleep deprivation. There are medications that can promote weight. Sleep apnea can promote weight. But I like to say that for my teenagers, I treat adolescents as well. And I love to tell them that when you're sitting around Chipotle with your friends after volleyball practice, you notice everyone's a different size, and you're all eating the same food, and you all came from volleyball practice. So it really points to genetics being one of the big reasons.
Great point. Dr. Rajo, I was hoping you could expand a little bit on what we talked about earlier. Just what are the limits of GLP-1s, and who would you consider to be the most suitable patient for that kind of treatment?
Okay. You asked the one person in the panel who does a lot of medication management, but also does a fair amount of surgery, right? And I will tell you that my experience from them comes from the fact that in my practice is full spectrum obesity care, right? So part of my goal when I treat patients is meeting them where they're at. We talk about some treatment is better than no treatment. So there is a role for medication in anybody who is struggling with obesity. The patients who really benefit from medical care for obesity, I think, are the ones who are earlier on in their spectrum of disease. The patients who are struggling with overweight and early stages of obesity, especially class 1 obesity. I think those patients really thrive on medical therapy. Depending on the type of medication, right, the amount of weight that most people can expect to lose will vary. We talk a lot in obesity world in terms of total body weight loss. What percentage of a patient's starting weight can we expect them to lose on average based on whatever form of treatment we decided to do? Historically, many of our medications would give us somewhere between 5% to 10% body weight loss over the course of a year. So it takes about a year's worth of therapy to see that result. The newer medications will, on average, yield somewhere in the range of 15 to 20% total body weight loss, which is a substantial improvement. And for patients who have BMIs less than 35, oftentimes that makes a really impactful change in their quality of life. For me, when I'm seeing patients who have what we refer to as class 2 obesity or class 3 obesity, that's patients who have BMIs 35 to 39.9 or 40 and above, that's when we start thinking, do we want to consider doing multimodal therapy? Meaning, do we want to do medication plus an endoscopic intervention or medication plus surgery? Or if we're seeing patients who have BMIs 40 or above, we think, is this somebody who may benefit from a surgery-first approach? But one of the things that's important to realize is that obesity is a chronic disease. And treatment today does not mean that you may not need treatment in the future, right? It is a disease that even if we treat it today, has a tendency to recur, has a tendency to progress. And having that disease progress is not a sign of failure, and it is not a sign that the previous therapy did not work. It is a sign that your disease has progressed, and now we need to think about approaching therapy differently.
So James, oops, sorry about that. So James, we know there is a stigma with obesity, and we know that the contributing factors to that could be our diet, like what we've talked about, maybe lifestyle choices. So how has the availability of this drug affected those who are battling this condition and are living with this type of stigma in their daily lives?
Yeah, I think when we talk about these medications and we talk about bariatric surgery, there's a soft understanding that these are just readily available and that anybody can access them. But in reality, that's not the truth. A significant amount of the population does not have access to these obesity management services. In the state of Florida, it actually is a little bit better for bariatric surgery. So state employees, Pinellas County, you actually have bariatric surgery coverage. But as far as these medications that we're talking about, they are not covered. Now, there are ways that we hear patients, you can get around that if you have one of the obesity-related conditions, such as type 2 diabetes. You might be prescribed Ozempic, which is Wegovy, or Mounjaro, which is Zepbound. So we'd often hear doctors working as best as they can with patients to increase access, but by and large, there's a significant access to care gap overall in the United States. And then you asked the question about weight bias. So people with obesity are often impacted by weight bias both externally and internally. Studies have shown that external weight bias is on its way down. So what I mean by that is you don't see public or direct a direct targeting of people with obesity. Maybe you see it online in comments and such, but not as much as it was. Internalized weight bias is how we think of ourselves. So a lot of times people with obesity, severe obesity, they don't feel they're deserving of care because oftentimes throughout their whole life they've been stigmatized. Unfortunately, this stigma often happens in the healthcare setting. And you often hear medical professionals telling someone with obesity, well, you should eat less and move more. Now, thankfully, we have medical professionals, such as the ones on this panel, Dr. Moore, who see obesity as a chronic disease and deserving of treatment, but it's a very slow progression. We're not there yet 100%.
Gotcha. And speaking of that, speaking of how we see advertisements for this drug or conversations happening online, personally, I've seen it as almost billed as a miracle drug in some ways. So Dr. Ferreira, can you speak to that? Just, is there more to successful weight loss than just taking this injection once a week? And what in patients that you work with in your practice, what are you seeing that make up that whole process that works for someone?
Sure. Yeah, the media is powerful and sometimes not always accurate. So medications and surgery, there are wonderful tools out there, but really we need a comprehensive approach. And so when I have patients who come to my office, I spend an hour as a new patient consultation, and part of that is discussing medication, and part of that is discussing surgery. But we also talk about genetics. We talk about other medical conditions, medications they're already taking. I talk about all of the pieces, the tools in the toolbox. And so there's nutrition, physical activity, medications, bariatric surgery, sleep and stress. And when you see online that you can get this shot and you see weight loss that celebrities have had, it's very tempting to think, oh, I just need that injection and I'm good. I have patients sometimes who will come in and say, my friend is on that shot, I just need that shot and I'll see you back in 6 months. And I say, nope, that's not what we do. Because again, we are dealing with a complex chronic disease. We wouldn't do that with diabetes, for example, where we would just say, here, just take this shot and you don't have to think about it, we don't have to know anything. No, this is a complicated disease that needs a all-hands-on-deck approach.
If I can jump on there. Yeah. So just baseline facts about what these drugs are FDA approved for. Okay, so yes, they all started for diabetes drugs, and many of them do have separate brand names of the same drug for weight management. But there are a couple other FDA-approved indications for specific medications. Many of them have FDA approvals for cardiovascular risk reduction, Zepbound has sleep apnea, there's chronic kidney disease. So there is a lot of reasons out there to be on these drugs when they're billed as miracle drugs, how they affect multiple conditions and are approved for such. Now that does not, FDA approval does not equal insurance coverage, unfortunately. But these drugs, the research on them is going every which direction. So there's currently studies about substance abuse disorders and how these may help in those. There's studies about osteoarthritis. So yes, they're being billed as miracle drugs, and it's not an unwarranted label because they are showing benefit in a lot of different conditions. But we all have to temper our expectations. You know, a miracle drug today we may find out 10 years from now side effects we just weren't aware of, and that's just the nature of science. That's all I had there.
I'm glad you brought up the side effects. Through our own reporting at the Times, we've covered that Novo Nordisk is involved in a class action lawsuit over some side effects. I believe it was stomach paralysis. So I'm wondering if you could talk more about those side effects and how common they are or how serious they can be.
Sure. So also numbers. It's estimated right now that 1 in 7 Americans have either tried these medications or are currently on these medications. So apply that to, what is there, 360 million people in America, something like that. That's a large number, right? So when we talk about side effects and prevalence, you know, if there was a lot more serious things like stomach paralysis, which is a sensational way to phrase something in the news, we would know more about how bad these drugs are, in my opinion. That's not to say they don't cause side effects, and everyone has a different temperature to how well they receive medications. There's also a lot of people who are unfortunately using these medications either not under the guidance of medical professionals, through these online portals, through not even any oversight of a nurse practitioner, physician, wherever. So side effects are common. They work in the GI system. So a lot of people do get nausea. They may have some indigestion, maybe some vomiting. Some of that can be tied to how you're using the drug. They can cause constipation, both sides of the stomach. You can see these side effects. Stomach paralysis, though, that is very, very, very rare. I wouldn't say that I've seen that in my practice, although people definitely do have slowdowns of the stomach. The drug does delay gastric emptying. That's the fancy term for slowing it down. So people who have a pre-existing condition called gastroparesis, where their stomach already empties dramatically slower, they're not always a good idea for those patients. So a lot of these side effects that you see in the news do come from people who were not appropriately screened or are not appropriately obtaining these drugs and using them.
I'd like to build on that for a second. And so what's interesting with that is that, yes, these medications are new to obesity, but these medications are not new. So for diabetes, they've been around for over a decade. There's plenty of data out there showing how efficacious these medications are for people living with chronic health conditions. But I also think it's important to note that, and now it's been tempered down by the FDA, but for over a year, we dealt with a rampant compounding problem where you had these online telehealth platforms that were selling what was believed to be Wegovy and Zepbound, when in reality, Eli Lilly nor Novo Nordisk sell the API to their medication. So it's impossible for these pharmacies to be making that medication. People were ordering these medications. I actually saw a news article, not by publication, a different one talking about a gentleman who had passed away from using Wegovy, but then way down in the article it said compounded version. So we got to be careful, and we need responsible reporting on that, because when you ask somebody, well, what are you on? They say, well, I'm on Wegovy, or I'm on Zepbound, and they say, are you using like Lilly Direct or NovoCare? No, I get it from this place I found on Reddit. Okay, that we consider that the gray market, Obesity Action Coalition does not support gray market in any way, shape, or form, but it's really important that we take that into consideration when the narrative around these medications and where they're really coming from.
Absolutely. So we talked a little bit about how GLP-1s were developed for patients with diabetes. Dr. Rajo, I was hoping you could expand on how it works for folks who have diabetes, and just what people need to know if they're diabetic, and does it work for people with all kinds of diabetes? Excuse me.
So that's a great question, but I'm actually going to defer to my family medicine colleague on that one.
Okay.
I was going to shift that down the end to our PharmD here.
I don't want to hog this, but yeah, I feel qualified to talk about this. So two primary ways they help with diabetes. First and foremost, they are what are called insulin secretagogues. Diabetes, type 2 diabetes, is either characterized by a lack of making enough of your own insulin or just not being as sensitive to your own insulin, or both. Type 1 diabetes, you're not making insulin at all. So these drugs don't really have a use in type 1 diabetes. In type 2 diabetes, when your blood sugar is elevated, they will help your body produce more of its own insulin to counteract that. And then, of course, additionally, they are helping with your dietary, your appetite intake. You are intaking less sugar. So you'll have a better response to sugar. You intake less sugar overall. That helps with diabetes to a significant degree. And then what was the other part of that question? I'm sorry.
I don't know, that's exactly what I was going to say, though, but I
Okay.
feel like you said it better.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I'm coming back to you, Dr. Rajo. As our resident surgeon on the panel, how do you make the decision when you're talking to patients on when is it time to explore a surgical option versus, they've tried GLP-1s or maybe they haven't, should they try that first? When is surgery a good option?
So a lot of it depends on where the patient is and what they feel is the best form of treatment for them, right? Some form of treatment is better than no treatment at all. So if I see a patient who is BMI in the 70s who tells me that the only thing they feel comfortable doing is taking an oral GLP-1, then that's what we're doing. Because some form of treatment and opening the door to that conversation and meeting that patient where they're at means that I have an engaged patient. It means that they know that I'm willing to work with them, right? In terms of how do we know it's the right therapy for them? Well, a lot of that depends on the response. Many patients may be apprehensive about doing something that's procedural because the idea of surgery carries with it a connotation of risk. And this is true in everything that I do in my life because I'm a surgeon. Everything that I do with it carries risk. But the reality of the matter is that driving your car also carries risk. And the risk of surgery in today's day and age, in the way we do it now, is very minimal. If you look at the data now, the risk of bariatric surgery, even our most complex surgeries, carries a level of risk that is very similar to that of having your gallbladder removed electively. It's actually, in some studies, safer than having things like having a knee replaced or having spine surgery. So the complexity of operations has allowed us to deliver really excellent obesity treatment, but the way that our technique has evolved in the last 20 years has allowed us to deliver very safe surgery. Now you ask, how do we make that decision? Who goes to surgery, who goes to obesity medication? If a patient is on obesity medication, I usually tell them, give yourself a window of time. You should be able to tell whether the medication is working for you if you have titrated to the maximum dose and you're on that dose for at least 3 to 6 months. And if you're not seeing a shift in your body weight that is at least 5% or more, and you're on the maximum dose of that medication, you may not be somebody who responds to that therapy. The other things that may push patients away from medication are side effects, right? They may be a lower BMI patient, but if they cannot tolerate the side effects of drug therapy, that might push them towards something that's more procedural. On the other extreme, right? If I have somebody who is of a high BMI, but who is a very high risk for surgery because of their heart disease or their lung disease or what have you, then that's somebody who we may say, let me put you through medical therapy as a way of making surgery safer for you. Or let me see if you respond very well to medical therapy as your only therapy, and we can defer the risk of having an operation for you. So medications it's not an either or. It's a what it best fits for your particular clinical scenario.
Okay. And just a reminder to our audience, we will be collecting questions, so please keep an eye out for some folks from the Times who are walking around to collect your questions. Dr. Fiera, I was hoping you could talk about any misconceptions that you hear from patients. Are there any common questions that you get that are maybe based off what people see on the internet?
Sure. You're talking specifically about the GLP-1 receptor agonist, yes. So the question I get a lot from patients is, how long am I going to have to be on this? If I start this therapy, am I going to have to be on this forever? And I explained that we are going to be managing obesity as a chronic disease forever. In 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, I probably won't be practicing in 50 years, but somebody will be helping you with your weight because there always needs to be a plan in place. Now, what that plan looks like can shift at any given time. And that's why I follow up with my patients closely. What we do now may look completely different than what we do in a year, 10 years, 20 years. And so it's always that conversation. But we always need some plan in place. So maybe it involves taking a medication forever. Maybe it involves taking a different medication. Maybe you get to where you want to be and you say, I don't know if I need this stuff anymore. Then we have the conversation, do we want to stop and see what happens? Do we want to change medication? Do we want to consider a different therapy? But there's always a plan. There's always a discussion. There's no end to, obesity doesn't get cured. It gets managed long term.
Okay. So Dr. Piskotowski, I think it's been well reported that these GLP-1 drugs can be expensive. Often cases, insurance won't cover people depending on why they're asking for the drugs. I know personally, people who pay cash to get them. Can you talk a little bit about that cost and the access to some of these drugs? And do you think generics will be available soon?
Okay. Yes, I could talk about that, and I do apologize that this may be a little bit longer of an answer because I'm sure, what the bottom line is a lot of what everyone wants to know. So let's start with insurance coverage. By large, most insurance companies only cover these drugs for type 2 diabetes. So when we talk about their other FDA approvals, as I alluded to, weight loss, sleep apnea, many just do not. They do not have to. They are not legally required to cover these drugs for these indications, so they're very expensive. And it's very easy to blame insurance companies as, being too complex, not wanting to provide care, and to some aspects that can be true. But financially, these drugs, their list price is over $1,000, so whatever your insurance premium is, let's say you pay $500 a month, that means that company is losing $500 a month on you. All right, so it does make financial sense that a lot of insurance companies do not, and unfortunately, data in terms of cost-benefit analysis right now still does not show them to be cost-effective. They're about 2 to 3 times the margin that most studies use to say, hey, does it meet cost-effectiveness? So yes, you can get them covered if you have type 2 diabetes, or if your insurance plan does participate in coverage for drugs like Zepbound, but all those conditions, too, are always going to be, hey, do you have the disease state, and how bad is it? All drugs in the GLP class will incur what's called a prior authorization, which is a misnomer. It's nothing prior, it's after we order the drug, but it's criteria from your insurance of, hey, is it bad enough? For sleep apnea, most insurance is only covered if you have moderate sleep apnea, which is determined by a sleep study with a AHI greater than 15. So yeah, insurance coverage is tough, and then there's the copay, which just because it's covered does not always mean that's affordable. Your copay for these medications, the bills can still shock you when you go to the pharmacy. So there's a lot of information there too to get into, especially in terms of Medicare patients. One thing I will note, Medicare patients are some of the toughest patients to get these drugs for, simply because it's actually in the Modernization Act of 2003 that Medicare cannot cover drugs, cannot cover anorexic medications, which are weight loss medications. There is some information about that maybe changing this year through the Bridge and Balance Act, which would grant about $50 copays to patients for these drugs specifically for weight loss and other conditions that they're approved for. We don't know, that's not in effect yet, so information is still oncoming for those, but that's a huge portion of the population that's left out. Now, direct access. The names you've heard here, NovaCare, LillyDirect, those are the manufacturers for Wegovy and Zepbound. They have a pharmacy process where, hey, if we know insurance won't cover these drugs, we can prescribe to that pharmacy. They will contact you. And I always quote patients the maintenance drug prices because you will see all the promos online of pay as low as $150 a month, which, hey, that sounds great. But those are the loading doses. These drugs all have titrations up to an effective dose. So realistically, the oral options that are out there from the manufacturer, which we do recommend, those are the ones that are FDA approved, have been studied, not the compounding ones. The oral drugs, Wegovy oral and now Foundeo oral, they are $300 a month when you're on a maintenance dose. Wegovy, the injection, is $350 a month when you're on a maintenance dose. Zepbound is $400 to $450 a month when you're on a maintenance dose. Those are quite up there. So it very much varies in terms of the financial insurance aspects. For patients who have type 2 diabetes, there are what are called patient assistance programs through some manufacturers. Those are for patients, not for weight loss, but for diabetes, where if a provider writes an order, it's a form where they fill out. If you meet certain financial income criteria, then they will send you the drug for free. But that process has been whittled down now. Really, in my experience, Trulicity is the only one that we can really get for Medicare patients even. Ozempic was actually, Medicare patients were removed from eligibility for Ozempic now as of last year. Generics-wise, there technically is a generic available on the market. Liraglutide is a GLP. It's a daily one, not a weekly one like most that we're familiar with. Brand names are Victoza and Saxenda. It went generic about a year ago, but we actually saw this weird phenomenon where, hey, just because it's generic, coverage actually got worse. Prices are still around $300 or $400 a month. So it's a very complex, very intermingling field, but we really do recommend trying to get insurance coverage if you can. You can always call your insurance company ahead of time. The phone number on the back of your insurance card, you can call them and say, hey, I have sleep apnea. Do you cover Zepbound? They have to tell you. They can't not tell you that information. But it's tempering expectations. It does take time. It goes through prior authorizations. Yes, the direct-to-consumer models are quicker, but they're costlier.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things to note. So we do see OAC members that they start out on the 1.5 oral dose of Wegovy, and they actually do quite well on that, and that's $149 a month. This week, on Thursday, Wegovy the 4 milligram dose was supposed to go from $149 to $199. Novo Nordisk very quietly updated that to an expiration of August 31st of this year. That probably most likely will continue to get pushed out. The one thing right now is you have over 125 pharmaceutical companies in development of medications for the treatment of obesity. The next class. A lot of them are looking more at muscle preservation, especially in the elderly population. And what we're going to have with that is price erosion. And so with price erosion, the cost of these medications will come down. Now, whether or not that translates to insurance coverage, that remains to be seen. We talked a little bit about the Medicare population, the demonstration project that was announced by the administration last fall. That's going to start very soon, where Medicare recipients will have access to obesity management services, GLP-1s. In addition to that, we also support the Treat and Reduce Obesity Act. And so this is legislation that we've been championing for over a decade now that would essentially codify the demonstration project, the nitty-gritty of it, so that Medicare recipients would have access to obesity treatment services under their plan. So that's really where we look to the public. If you're Medicare eligible, we need your voice because you are the advocates that we need to contact your legislators to say, hey, I need coverage for obesity management services. And speaking of that, I got to say that I loved your answer about what is the right treatment. If more medical professionals approached obesity treatment like that, it would be a completely different world. Because right now we're living in an all or nothing kind of society. The narrative is weight loss. What is the number on the scale? But there's bariatric surgery. There's endoscopic procedures. There's the balloon that FDA approval just got. Allurion just got FDA approval for the balloon. There are so many options out there when it comes to obesity treatment. But the problem is people keep hearing about the ones that, celebrities are taking and everybody wants that. But you've got to have doctors like this that actually have a productive conversation, a proactive two-way conversation to make an informed decision, not just for what the doctor wants, but what's the best thing for the patient as well.
And when we say options, you mentioned 125 companies. This is a bonanza right now, and there are so many GLP-based drugs in development. It's actually going to expand even further. We said GLP, we said GIP. The next drugs out will be GLP, GIP, glucagon. Then there's the myostatin inhibitors. There's going to be calcium agonists. There's a lot of different drugs. There's like 40 or 50 drugs that are in development right now that are GLP-based. which eventually we'll have to get away from just calling them GLPs because it's going to be a mix and match of a lot of different receptors. But there are options, and as you've heard today, tools. These are tools, and the thing with tools, if you're like me trying to fix a dishwasher, you can't just use a screwdriver. You have to use the pliers, sometimes the hammer. So there's a lot of different ways to approach this, but we will see just more and more and more and more and more medications be coming out.
Yeah, it's a little off topic, but you mentioned something earlier about like how these drugs are like often portrayed as a miracle drug, right? I will tell you, probably the biggest miracle of these drugs is the fact that they've changed the conversation, right? Before the rise of GLP drugs, the way that we talked about obesity was in hushed tones, behind closed doors, with a sense of shame. The fact that we now have medical therapy that we know is acting hormonally, that we know is causing an effective change in people's biology, sort of validates the concept that we've been talking about for decades of obesity as a disease. There's pathophysiology, there is a mechanism in the body that is not working the way it's meant to. And GLP-1 therapy, by demonstrating effectiveness, has proven that concept. And it has allowed for, and by being so visible, it has allowed for so many more people who would internalize this stigma of, I have obesity, this is who I am, I will never be anything else, and it becomes sort of their sense of self. It's allowed them to break out of that, and it's allowed them to have these conversations with their primary care doctors, to have these conversations with their physicians, and look for treatment and look for care, which I think that is really what the miracle is.
Absolutely. All right. So James, last year there was a reported shortage of some of these drugs, and I believe that's no longer the case. But can you talk about what kind of effect that had on the community of people who are maybe trying to access it? Now that we've moved beyond this shortage, can you just talk about how that affected patients and how drug companies responded?
Yeah, I think we definitely saw a shortage with Wegovy when it first came out. And, you know, with Wegovy, it's a cold chain, right? So it has to be refrigerated. The process of getting it from manufacturer to the States and then to the patient is a little bit more complex. Once they got a hold of it, and then you saw Zepbound come out, they were able to catch up with supply and demand. Now the orals, they can manufacture them much faster, so we're able to offer more options to patients. I do think the one thing that we've got to take into account that we really haven't talked about on the panel tonight is the mental health side of obesity. And that is something that is very crucial in individuals with obesity. They do deal with a lot of that self-stigma and trying to work through mental health issues. And someone with obesity that tries a weight loss option, if it doesn't work for them, they will say that they failed the treatment. In any other disease, if somebody has cancer and you try a certain type of chemotherapy and they're a non-responder, we say, well, you didn't respond to that. We're going to try a different one now. But with obesity, the patient puts the blame on themselves. And this just goes back to the progression of someone dealing with obesity from childhood to adulthood. So we have to think about that people dealing with this disease often feel very preyed upon. But now, as they were saying, the conversation is a little bit more out there. I would say that the conversation is a little more elevated now on weight loss than it is obesity, but I think we're getting there. But I do think that, you know, patients with obesity have put up a lot. I often hear people say, I take this medication and I'm only nauseous for about the first hour or two in the morning. And you got to think about that. That's what they're willing to go through to lose weight. The first 2 hours of the morning, I'm cool being very nauseous. We really should be beyond that, and I think with the development, we're getting there, but you can see just how badly people want to address this disease, and now it's so promising that you have medication, surgery to help them do that.
Okay, so we have quite a large stack of questions, so thank you. We're going to get to these very shortly here, but just a few more questions for our panelists. Dr. Ferreira, those who battle obesity, I think because of the cost of these drugs, maybe they start it when they can afford it, but then can't always be consistent because of the cost. Do you see that in your practice, and do you warn against that? Are there side effects to that?
Sure. So we know cost is definitely an issue, and I help patients with that decision if they are going to invest the money into these medications, understanding, again, we are dealing with a chronic disease. And so a lot of these medications take 5 or 6 months to get up to the maximum doses where they are most effective for what we're treating. So if someone's thinking, I could maybe afford a month or two, I help them with that decision that this may not be the right therapy, unfortunately. And remembering there are other treatments as well. You know, we have other medications to treat obesity that are not GLP-1 receptor agonists, and they are cheaper medications and may be right for someone as well. So again, it's that conversation about what therapies are available, and I give the menu. You know, I explain the menu of options, and then we work together to see what's the right one.
Can you give a couple of examples of other medications?
Sure. So there are 3 basic types of FDA-approved medications to treat weight. The GLP-1, GLP-1 GIP, we all know about. There are also older medications. There's phentermine. Phentermine is an appetite suppressant that got approved back in 1959. It used to be part of the fen-phen. Maybe people have heard of that one. Fen-phen left the market, but the phentermine part of it was actually safe for most people. So we still have phentermine available, and I think the cash price is somewhere around $15 a month. We also have a version that is mixed with another medicine called topiramate or Topamax, and it's called Qsymia. And Qsymia also went generic last year, and that one is about $40 to $60 per month. So again, we discuss these options and decide what could be right. We also have Contrave, which is a combination of bupropion and naltrexone. So I tend to think of that one for people who struggle sometimes with the mental health, the emotional tendency to have, say, increased appetite when they don't feel well emotionally, whether it's depression, anxiety, the appetite can increase in those times. So medications like the bupropion naltrexone could be beneficial for that. We also have medications that are not actually FDA approved for weight, but we know that they are helpful. Things like metformin is something I use quite a bit in patients as well. And then we also look down your medication list and see what are we giving you that's causing potentially some weight gain. We do it to you as well. We don't mean to. We have great intentions, but there are medications that can also promote weight. So we talk about, are there some substitutions we could do there as well?
Okay, great. My last question for you all before we get to our audience questions, and I'd love for you all to answer. We'll just go down the row here. What do you think is the future for use of GLP-1s? What you're seeing in medical trials or from your patient populations, from access, where do you think we're headed?
Well, I think we said tonight that GLP-1s have really blown open the conversation of weight loss and helping people with obesity. I think we're headed down a promising path, but we have to ensure people have access to these medications. We are very much in a cash pay market right now. You have Lilly Direct, NovoCare, we've mentioned those tonight. We've removed the payers from the program and we're going more direct to consumer. Obesity is now a consumer-driven market. So the treatment of obesity is now consumer-driven. But with these programs, have we taken pressure off of Hello? Have we taken pressure off of insurance to cover them? Well, some would say yes, some would say no. So I do think we're headed down a promising path, but we still very much have to work to ensure that our insurance providers, our policymakers view obesity as a chronic disease and not just a disease of personal responsibility.
Okay.
I'll tell you, the way that I see GLP-1s changing my practice in the next 10, 15, 20 years is it's really opened up the door for multimodal therapy, right? In my world, and now the conversation is not lifestyle and, lifestyle therapy only or surgery. Now we have additional tools that we can offer, which means that we have better success rates, which we have better compliance. We have things that we can offer our patients that are going to allow them to maintain a result or achieve a result long term. In my world, we see a lot of we think of GLPs in almost similar to the way that we think of chemotherapy, right? Do we do medical therapy before surgery? Do we do medical therapy after surgery? Do we do medical therapy in concurrence with surgery? Do we do surgery? And if somebody has weight recurrence, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, are they a candidate for medical therapy, or do we need to combine that with another form of modality like an endobariatric procedure to help achieve the result? So it really is changing the way where we're mixing and matching modalities to customize care for the patient who is standing in front of us, taking into consideration not just their health, but also where they're standing from a mental health standpoint and like socioeconomically, like what makes sense for you.
I am very excited about the other medical conditions. These are showing promise, and actually FDA approval for certain conditions that was already mentioned. So moderate to severe sleep apnea for Zepbound, for Wegovy, so preventing recurrent heart disease or strokes. There's also the treatment of liver fibrosis that we're seeing more and more of. These are being studied in arthritis, depression, addiction, all of the things that we mentioned. And there are receptors about all over the body for these things. And so they are finding every day new things that these medications are treating.
I don't know if y'all can see, but I'm bursting at the seams of things to talk about in that regard. 3 things come to mind. 1, the conversation on how we define body types. You've heard the word BMI, or the acronym BMI a couple times today. That is an imperfect measure of how we view body types, weight, obesity, because BMI is a calculation derived just from height and weight. Can't change your height. So we see a lot more conversation about getting what are called more of the anthropomorphic measures, body fat, muscle mass. Those things matter, you know? To say that I'm a 34-year-old male, to say that we judge my body type the same as we would a 68-year-old female who's 5'2", it's kind of odd. So we have scales that can get that other information, because BMI, again, doesn't take age, height, age, sex, muscle mass, body fat, all these things into consideration that matter. So I think we're seeing a lot more conversation about how do we actually phenotype weight. 2 is actually women's health. These drugs have really made more of a conversation there. As 50% of you in the audience may know, if you see your doctor with an issue, and a lot of times there's, hey, we don't know enough about that, or hey, that's odd, let's move along. So the condition PCOS, which is a very, very underdiagnosed condition in women of childbearing age, we're seeing a lot more conversation about that, just a lot of times due to these drugs. But we're also seeing a lot more focus on osteoporosis, because as we mentioned about some drugs looking at preserving muscle mass and how that relates to frailty in osteoporotic women, that's a big conversation area that we're looking at. And then the 3rd one goes back to compounding. These drugs have blown the doors off of that due to the shortage. When all these compounding companies started getting really a foothold, and side note, they haven't gone away, we're seeing a lot that we really need to pump the brakes on. It's gone beyond GLPs, okay? So, you know, if you ever pull up the website hims.com, there's some combinations of medications that are out there that you're scratching your head at. I think it's a 5-in-1 pill that's compounded by them for weight loss. 3 of the drugs of which the primary side effect is diarrhea. So you're paying money to have a 3 out of 5 chance of sitting on the toilet a lot. So we see a lot of there's a lot that's scary out there too. Yes, these drugs are very good, but what they have done to the landscape of, hey, just because these other drugs are available, we can combine them and then sell them for men's sexual health, for weight loss as well. There's just a lot of scary things that we see that, you know, while the access was improved due to compounding, what that has done to the landscape of medication availability for a lot of other implications it's something to think about.
All right, thank you. Okay, this first audience question. Does medical science know what the actual cause of obesity is? And is it working to find a true cure, not just a patch to manage it? Would anyone like to take that one?
I will not answer except for the last part of the question. There is no such thing as a GLP patch. Just so y'all are aware, whatever you see for Ozempic on Amazon is not Ozempic.
Very true. So we know that obesity is complicated. And again, I talk to my patients about genetics. So we know this starts in genetics. If we have a genetic predisposition, so we were born into genes that say our body is going to be somewhere in a certain adult range, but then we put these other things on top. But it really does start with hormones and genetics. It's how our body fat cells work. Our body fat cells are called adipocytes. And when they're not working correctly, that's called adiposopathy. So we know that a lot of this is just how our body handles nutrients, stores them, and that mechanism, like it was mentioned, is just not working correctly. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that there's no role for our lifestyle and our nutrition and our physical activity, but we know that it's a biochemical and genetic disorder. Now, the cure would be lovely, and I'm sure there are people working like mad, because if they could cure obesity, wouldn't that be amazing? But we're looking at it right now as finding these management tools to help adjust what the problem is in the body, but unfortunately right now there is no cure.
Anyone else like to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, it's just tough. I mean, Dr. Ferrer is right. It's such a complicated disease pathology, and the more we study it, the more we start looking under the rug, the more we start realizing just how complex it is, right? Because genetics play a huge role. And then there's this thing on top of genetics referred to as epigenetics, which means that if you have a twin sibling who has your exact same genetic composition, but you were brought up in a different food environment, your response may be different, because there might be something in your environment that triggered or activated certain genes that somebody else may also have that didn't get activated in their course of their life. So it starts getting more and more complex the more we research it. So I don't know that we'll ever have something that is like a cure, but I think that the more we understand the disease, the better treatment modalities we will have.
You're right, though. That concept of epigenetics is so fascinating, because there are twin studies like that. And even things that we get exposed to, like chemicals, Teflon, preservatives, additives, pesticides. There is a whole list of things that can turn those genes on and make you express the gene for obesity. So it is complicated.
All right. We got a lot of questions about dosing, GLP-1 dosing. So I'm going to read this question, but also expand on to kind of capture a few others. I am curious about maintenance doses. It's my perception that users hit their target weight in the first year and then start titrating down or dosing less frequently as a way to maintain a healthy weight. Is there sufficient data to understand any potential long-term side effects? We can start with that one.
The maintenance dosing is what works for the patient, to be honest. Healthy weight loss is 1 to 2 pounds a week on average. So if it's working at step 2 or step 3 of the Wegovy dose titration protocol, by all means, stay on that. You don't have to go up just because it has a higher dose available. As we've alluded to before too, when you've lost the weight, previous medical science was a lot about take drugs for weight loss, stop the drug, maintain the weight yourself, and we're seeing that just doesn't really work a lot. So long-term maintenance dosing, there's a lot of different pathways, especially with these drugs, to do that. Is, hey, do you go back to the starter doses and go there to maintain the weight? Do you do lower dosing, maybe not all the way down, but extend the dosing interval? Instead of once a week, do you do every 14 days? So there's a lot of ways to go about it. There's nothing that's really, hey, set in stone of what you need to do. It's very patient-centered.
And there's a lot of research happening because of the cost of these medications. There's a lot of research about, can we transition from a GLP-1 to Qsymia, for example, or can we maintain on phentermine? So there are studies going on. What I find with my patients, though, is that when they get to a certain dose of a GLP-1 receptor agonist, they feel this sense of the relief from the brain hunger. The food noise is how my patients describe it. And so whatever dose it takes to get that food noise to quiet down. But I find when we taper down, then you get to a point where, okay, it's starting to come back again. And I used to be able to walk past those cookies, but now they're kind of calling to me again. So I find it's really dose dependent and person dependent.
Okay.
I think it depends too, that when it comes to obesity, we often think we have to find the one-size-fits-all approach. But if you look at the journey of obesity, it's not linear. It's very much up and down. And there's been studies that show when you have life events, you get married, your weight goes down, right? You lose weight for the wedding. Then you get married a couple of years, you get relaxed, you get happy, weight goes up. You have a baby, weight goes up. Divorce, weight goes down. Lose a job, weight goes up. So life is very much up and down. And we've got to think about that, is that it's not linear. So I loved your answer about use what works for you. You don't have to go up to Novo just released the 7.2 milligram, 7.2 for the Wegovy, the injectable. But you don't have to go to that if something is working for you lower. And then also, like we talked about, other options that are out there. Maybe you look for a step therapy to transition to something else. So there's more options. I just think we've got to change the mindset a little bit in that.
And that Wegovy is triple the max dose that was previously out there.
Wow. So is it detrimental to change GLP-1 meds or delivery methods, say if you switch from one brand to another? Or what about if you started with the pill but then changed to the injectable? Are there any side effects or questions patients should have or when they're talking to their doctor?
So in my experience, the medications, we have to be careful about side effects. So often we don't have to start over. Let's say you're on Wegovy and you decide to go over to Zepbound. There's an art of medicine. There's no real protocol, unfortunately, so we're all kind of doing this individually. But we do want to just make sure we're careful about side effects. We know these side effects of nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, so we have to be very careful to monitor that. Same thing about the injection versus the pill. If you're on Wegovy injection and you go to the pill or vice versa, because it is the same medication, it's semaglutide, that's a little bit of an easier transition, and we know a little bit more about that, but just really watching for those side effects.
Pretty much exactly what she said. Keep in mind, some of these drugs are once a day, some are once a week. So just when you're switching between drugs, which is absolutely valid because there's a million reasons to need to switch, you just need to take that in mind. If you're going from Wegovy to Zepbound, don't take Wegovy on Saturday and then take Zepbound on Sunday. You're not going to have a good time. There are some algorithms out there. There are some dose equivalency tables. They're not exactly 100% accurate just because everyone is different in their tolerance. And there's also these new drugs coming out all the time. So it's very hard for these tables to really keep track of everything. So yeah.
Yeah, but I'll also say that you asked about whether is it safe or not safe, right? Under the care of your medical provider who is prescribing these things and you're doing it under a monitored setting, I do think that it is safe because we're not going to prescribe something for you where we think you're going to have a high likelihood of having a side effect or a meaningful, like significant reaction. The people who tend to get in trouble with switching between dosing or between medications, or usually the people who are accessing the medication outside of their routine healthcare providers, right? People who go from compounded brand A to compounded brand B, and even if it's the same dose on the label, the actual amount of drug in the vial is actually different. Or the people who switch from, or you may switch from one brand to another that way, those people can get into trouble because they don't maybe have the guidance to go through that safely. But if you do it under the care of your obesity specialist, it likely is a very safe thing to do.
And the other thing to keep in mind too, you asked about switching between medications. To his point, if you're doing it under the care of a provider because maybe you feel this medication is not working for you or your weight has plateaued, that's totally different. But in the patient advocacy realm, sometimes they're forced to by their insurance provider. So last year we saw CVS Caremark out of the blue say, you know what, we're not covering Zepbound anymore. If you're on Zepbound, go to Wegovy. Now, Novo Nordisk must have negotiated a very nice price with CVS Caremark, but we had hundreds of people contacting our organization saying, wait a minute, I'm on Zepbound. I'm doing fabulous on it. Why do I have to change over now? Because that's what your insurance company has decided. So sometimes it's not always up to the patient. Sometimes they're forced to switch.
And that's just for weight loss medications. We even see this up in Gainesville, where insurance companies for diabetes, they're actually now requiring yearly venous draws of your A1C. So that's the actual arm draw. But we also in clinic commonly use what's called a point of care, which is just a finger stick, so we get those numbers right away. And many insurance companies are no longer accepting that. So if you've been on Ozempic for 3 years and you're well controlled now, but your diagnosis was based off of a point of care A1C that was, let's say, 8.7, insurance can say, hey, that was a point of care one. We only cover venous now, and we're not grandfathering this in, so you're no longer qualified for Ozempic from our point of view. But this patient is now controlled. All their A1Cs since have been fine. So insurance can change on a dime, and patients can be forced into these scenarios.
What we saw, just to add to that too, was very interesting. When compounding was at its highest, you had some people that were taking a compounded medication actually losing weight on it, right? And then they got their BMI down to what we'd say maybe overweight or normal. Then the compounder was shut down by the FDA, and so then they went to the doctor and said, hey, I'm interested in these medications. And whether the doctor or the insurance company said, well, you don't have obesity. So they actually could not get it. So then they said, you know what you have to do? You have to regain the weight in order to qualify for the medication.
Wow.
And this is true. We've had people call and they say, my doctor and my insurance company are telling me I have to regain now because I don't qualify for these medications. Because how do you prove that you were on it? Like you can't tell them I was on a compounded GLP-1. The insurance company is not going to recognize that.
Wow. Okay, so we got several questions here about supplements, things that you could take that maybe will help with side effects or maybe help with the changes your body is experiencing while on GLP-1s. There are several questions that point to supplements toward muscle wastage, so maybe creatine or probiotics. Is this something that you would recommend to your patients?
Resistance training, 30 minutes, 3 times a week.
Okay, all right.
Strength training is key for the muscle, absolutely. So there are really no supplements that are FDA approved to treat obesity. And the supplement market can tell you whatever they want to say. And then there's a little disclaimer at the bottom. This statement has not been reviewed by the FDA. So be very careful, buyer beware. I tell my patients that I'd like to know what they're taking, and I'd like to at least make sure they're safe. Sometimes patients just have expensive urine, but hey, if they feel like that's working well for them. Now, vitamin supplements, though, are a different story, and especially with bariatric surgery and with the GLP-1 medications and significant weight loss, we really want to be careful that we are checking vitamin levels with our providers because there are vitamin deficiencies that can happen.
Okay. This is a very specific question, but what has been the experience of patients with Down syndrome who have low muscle tone taking GLP-1s? Does anyone have any experience to share?
I do have some experience with that, and to be honest, to be fair, most of the Down syndrome patients that I take care of, they're actually they're on the Special Olympics teams for basketball, for track, everything, so that muscle is not typically a problem for them. But the administration of these medications can be quite difficult depending on who their caretaker is and that patient's temperament. These are injections by and large, so that can be quite scary to some people. So that is something to take into account. I've actually had a patient's caretaker ask us to more or less do the injections ourselves and strap the patients down, which absolutely not. That is not going to happen. But there's these things to take into account. Down syndrome patients, there's the lifestyle coaching is difficult at best just because of the preclusions for diet, their exercise levels. These medications are absolutely helpful. I've seen very good success in those patients.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we should be treating everyone. And especially our younger people or our patients who are struggling with mental illness or emotionally, or they also hopefully have caregivers who are maybe monitoring their nutrition, because we definitely want to try to push protein. But of course, they may have food aversions. These are very complicated cases, and these are why patients like that really need to be in with a provider who's watching them closely. I know in our office, we also have a body composition machine, which tells us muscle mass, body fat mass, so we can be watching as we go along, and if we start to see something concerning, we can address that. There are also dietitians who can work with people as well, and I think they're very valuable.
So we've talked a little about some of these online pharmacy providers like Him and Hers. Noom is one that's been pointed out here in this question. It sounds like most of these online providers offer the compounded versions. Would you recommend those sources for these drugs to people who are seeing those advertisements online?
Short answer, no, but the landscape is dramatically changing. When the whole shortage thing and the Novo Nordisk was suing Him specifically for misrepresenting what product they had, that lawsuit was going, kind of went away when then Novo Nordisk and Him said, you know what, why don't we just work together? So now they're going to supply the brand name to them. So I wouldn't say it's a black or white, yes or no, don't go with it. But to be honest, the best route is always your provider who you can see in an office or telemedicine, but at least your primary care. Rather than these online sources, they are incentivized to always go up on the dose because they usually get more money for those doses. And you don't always know the product you're getting. If you try to look at whatever quality assurance they have you're going to get nowhere. So if it is a compounded version, I do recommend against it. The prices may be enticing, but you don't know if they're getting it from a laboratory supply company. You don't know if they're getting it from manufacturers outside of the US, because more often than not, Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly are not sending their product elsewhere to be sold for cheaper.
And recently, I know I had a meeting with Novo Nordisk over the weekend, and I am sure Lilly is thinking the same way, that they're really interested in trying to provide affordable options for patients and really help them so that they don't struggle with that decision. And so they've even started partnering with Hims and Ro, and so there's been a lot of talk about offering brand medications through those companies and negotiating with them, because they really want patients to have access, and they know where some people are going online. They are. So they want to try to provide safer medications.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of appeal to the concept of like telehealth. I'll tell you what my gripe with it is it often leaves the patient struggling for an actual provider, right? You go through this, it confuses weight loss with obesity treatment, because the online providers are there to sell you a weight loss drug. They're not necessarily there to treat obesity, not the way that we think about obesity. They're not going to necessarily have the strongest resources in terms of nutrition support or look into the mental health component side of things. They may not keep track on body composition. If you have a side effect at 2 in the morning, they don't have an office number that you're going to be able to call, right? So a lot of it is, yes, you maybe have access to the medication through that way, but you lose a lot in terms of support and looking at obesity from like a multimodal disease standpoint. So there's a pro and there's a con. Every time they develop a new iteration of it, they become better and better at it. But as of today's day and age, like if a patient asks me about that, my recommendation is still, at this point, no. Talk to your doctor. Let us help you with this in a way that is going to be more comprehensive.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I say that because the pharmaceutical companies have the direct-to-consumer programs right now. Like we talked about, $149 is the starting price for the starting dose of Wegovy and orforglipron or Foundayo, which will be out this week. But the one thing to keep in mind with the telehealth companies is they might advertise $99 a month for Wegovy, okay? That is lower than the price. But then you find out there's an additional $200 a month fee to have their program. So now you're at $299 a month. So you're actually paying more, and most of the programs are bolted on programs like app-driven. You know, I don't know how many of you need a push notification telling you to smile in the morning. I don't, but that's where we're at with a lot of that. So, you know, buyer beware, do your homework. I still suggest, OAC strongly suggests, go to a healthcare provider, talk to them about your options. That is the best option.
Okay. So this is a question for our doctors. What proportion of weight loss is lean mass versus fat mass? And should resistance training volume or intensity be modified due to a lower calorie intake?
So I'll take that one, and then you can take this one. So what is quoted typically is that when we're losing weight in any way, body fat mass is typically 2/3 of the weight loss, and muscle mass could be about 1/3 of the weight loss. So that's the importance of remembering getting our protein intake, let's feed our muscles, and let's use our muscles. Resistance training, absolutely. And that's the guideline for not only taking these medications or just weight loss in general or bariatric surgery. But we do know that we do lose some lean body. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. So if you lose 50 pounds, let's say, then you have been carrying a 50-pound dumbbell on your chest, and you put that dumbbell down. Well, it doesn't take so much to get out of that chair anymore. So you're not weightlifting to move around like you might have been previously. So you're going to lose some muscle, but we need to be watching for that, and we need to focus on our protein and our strength training.
Yeah, the strength training component of it is key, right? Because you lose what you don't use. And so we usually recommend that patients try to engage in at least 30 minutes of resistance training at least 3 times a week. That's about 90 minutes. You can break it up in whatever way you want to really, but like the goal is to get anywhere between 75 to 150 minutes a week of like dedicated resistance training, depending on the intensity of it. Right? Low intensity, you go for longer. High intensity, you don't have to do as long. And that's sort of broad strokes painting general recommendations. But it's important to remember that it's not just about losing weight, right? It's about treating the underlying obesity. It's about improving longevity, preserving motion, returning function, right? The goal isn't for you to go from 400 pounds to 200 pounds, but now you're so weak you can't get out of your chair. I'd rather you be 280 but strong, 280 and you can chase after your grandkids, right? That's a different level of function that we're looking for. So we have to keep those things in mind. It's a very personalized conversation in terms of what do you do, but that's where we lean with the people who have that expertise, right? We lean on our physical therapists and our exercise professionals to help guide that conversation, which again goes back to I think this is important, why it's important that people get treatment in a comprehensive center, because we're going to think about those things and we're going to have the tools to help pair you with somebody who can answer that question for you and who can meet you where you're at in terms of whatever your mobility limitations may be. Because just having a blanket exercise recommendation doesn't work for somebody who has knee replacements, right? Or who has a rotator cuff injury or who has an elbow injury. Like, we got to personalize it to what they can do.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations for controlling hunger after ending GLP-1 injections? Maybe any advice or programming to help maintain that weight loss even once you've decided to stop taking the medication?
So remembering again that this is not your fault, that hunger is not because you're doing something wrong. This is biochemistry in the brain. And so when you're using a medication such as a GLP-1 that is boosting your fullness hormone, and then you stop getting that boost, as much as you want to will that hormone to work better, it's not going to work. Now, keeping that in mind, there are things you can do from a lifestyle perspective that can be helpful. So again, back to the importance of protein, fluids, dehydration can sometimes make us feel hungry. We also want to think about our sleep and stress. When we're not feeling well emotionally, when we're sleep deprived, we tend to be hungrier. So there are a variety of factors there, but remembering we're still dealing with biochemistry.
It's something that I feel like I have the same conversation a lot of times with some patients is these medications we've alluded to are tools. Tools are dependent on the user. All right, so some other phrases I use are medications are not magic. They're very helpful, but at the end of the day, patients do still have an active role in how they manage their lifestyle and everything going forward. So the biggest thing to do is dietary monitoring and exercise. Calorie tracking, there's a million different free apps on your phone that can help you with that. The most prevalent is MyFitnessPal. I think that has like the 40 million or something users, which can be tough. You know, it is homework, and no one really wants to sit there thinking about, hey, what all did I add to my salad or my chicken today? But it does take an active role from patients. You have to be invested in your healthcare. You have to be on top of things, because while a lot of times this is not your fault, and there is the biochemistry component, absolutely, but you're not just there by the wayside. You have agency. You can take control of your health. It may have different results and different levels of impact than you're hoping for or planning for, but at the end of the day, you have power in this.
So we're quickly running out of time here, but I'm going to try to ask 2 more questions. A side effect that we haven't talked a lot about yet today, but has come up quite a bit in our questions from the audience here, are vision problems related to GLP-1s. What information can we share about that risk of potential blindness while taking GLP-1s? And does age, gender, or any other demographic factor into those outcomes?
The eyes and the teeth are very separate entities from the rest of the body in terms of healthcare treatment. What the term that we're referring to here is non-arteritic ischemic optic neuropathy, abbreviated NION. There are trials that have seen some more evidence of that. There are trials that have not seen as much evidence of that. So there is very much an emerging field for that. But the eyes have multiple issues. There can be several different underlying reasons for vision changes. You know, the GLPs have seen some evidence that they might help with glaucoma. So it can go for and against. We just need more data.
The other thing is that when we are using these medications, remembering they are also diabetes medications, which means they can make your blood sugar fluctuate, and blood sugar fluctuations up and down can also cause a diabetes eye disease to potentially temporarily worsen. So if you have diabetes, absolutely making sure you're in with your eye doctors and getting those routine exams.
Okay. And our last question I'd love for all of you to answer. What do you hope is the main takeaway for the folks who came here tonight to learn more, that they take home with them and maybe share with their families about what they learned about GLP-1 use and obesity and just weight loss in terms of where we are at today in 2026?
Well, I think I'll do a two-part answer. Part one would be make an informed decision about your health care with your medical provider. There's no doubt by the stack of questions that this is a hot topic and people are very thirsty for information. So I'm going to do a shameless plug for the Obesity Action Coalition's National Convention, which is July 24th through the 26th in Orlando, Florida. You all know you take 275 to I-4, you'll be there in 15 minutes. It's totally fine. You're going to be there. So we're at the Renaissance Orlando, and we host a 3-day event where it's all patient-centric. So all the topics we talked about tonight, all the questions you all have, we help you with those answers. We have the best medical professionals in the field, social events, so on and so forth, advocacy opportunities. If you're interested and you want to learn more about it, we do have our table over there, the Obesity Action Coalition exhibit table, and I would love to see all of you there.
If there's one thing that I think is important for people to take away is that obesity is a complex disease, and there is not a one-size-fits-all answer. But just because there isn't a straightforward answer doesn't mean that there is no hope. We live in an extraordinary time where we have the greatest and most effective tools that we've ever had. And I think that this warrants a conversation with your provider if this is something that you're interested in.
Absolutely. I think when it comes to the GLP-1 type medications, again, remembering that one size doesn't fit all for that either, but what I do find is that it really does, for most people, tend to calm that brain noise so that you then can make those lifestyle changes that you know you want to make, but it just points to this biochemistry. And so I think a combination, a multidisciplinary, meaning a lot of people involved, hitting all of the different aspects of obesity is important, and GLP-1s are one of those great tools.
Tools in the toolbox. You as the user have agency in this. And again, the stigma is going by the wayside. Talk to a medical professional. Don't listen to Sharon posting on Facebook. Talk to your doctor. These medications may be appropriate for you. They may not. There's a variety of things out there besides GLPs as well.
All right. Well, thank you for being here tonight. And just a reminder that this event was recorded, and you will get an email in a few days with a link to that recording. You can also find it at tampabay.com/spotlight. And we want to thank AdventHealth, our partner on this conversation tonight. Please join me. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. All right. Have a good night.